that moment.
Need to say and welcome back to our final live podcast of the day from here at Frankfurt at the 5th Annual FinCrime Summit, hosted by Transform Finance. I'm joined by my co-host, Jane Blakeway, which you have probably all seen already today, but who you may not have met today is our new guest.
Hello.
Dr. Hans with the soft hands.
Hello everyone, thanks for the invitations.
It's our pleasure. He's got very soft hands. I shook his hand. I just want to say. So, firstly, a massive thank you for joining us. Just before we started, we were actually talking about you're an expert in counterterrorism, and I've always found it amusing isn't the right word because it's not amusing. Over the years, when working in banking, we get trainings on anti-money laundering, so AML and CFT, counter-financing of terrorism, and within that training, you'll get one slide on CFT, and mostly it's on proliferation finance. But if you ask a compliance officer, well, how do we actually monitor for terrorism financing? Tumbleweeds will blow through the room, because the truth is, and I said this to you just before we started, that a majority of terrorist financing actually comes from completely legitimate sources and is based on belief and moral systems. So it's very, very outside of behavioral analytics and understanding your clients, it's very difficult to identify. So we're going to go through a whole discussion. We're going to talk about NGO use cases. Is that really where a lot of this is happening, or have we seen changes in typologies? If you don't mind, we can touch on crypto as well and crypto exposure. Earlier today, we were advised that the crypto exposure to terrorist financing is reducing because the criminals see now that we can identify more readily through the chain their activities. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? But yeah, we've got a whole sheet of questions here. So
perfect, fantastic.
I'll pass it to Jane.
Thanks, Oonagh. That's brilliant. And lovely to have you. And thank you for your presentation earlier here at the event. Obviously, it was greatly received. And obviously, it does need more of a platform for sure. So Hans, you're Senior Director for the Counter Extremism Project, and you're based in Berlin.
And New York.
And New York.
So I'm dividing my time.
And New York as well. So maybe let's kick off. I think we wanted to talk about around income streams as well, didn't we, for the groups, and why there are so many. Maybe we could kick off with that.
Yeah. So look, I mean, as I already said in the earlier presentation today, the big challenge for the industry is that the regulatory and legal environment forces you into a bottom-up approach, right? So you're actually looking at every single tree, but you're missing the entire forest in front of your eyes. So having designed sanctions both for the German government as well as for the United Nations Security Council on counterterrorism, I can absolutely assure you, if the individual is on the sanctions list, if an individual is in adverse media, that's the last time they ever acted as a terrorism financer. That's the reason why they're on that list, to stop them doing that. So great if you find it, but it is going to be historically significant but not operationally relevant if you find something. So that bottom-up approach really needs to be accommodated or augmented by a top-down approach in which you actually take the words of the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, seriously when they talk about a risk-based approach. A risk-based approach doesn't mean do more of everything. It means, number one, you think where your risk exposure is, and then number two, you then use your, in every case, limited resources in the most effective way. That, as far as counterterrorism financing is concerned, requires at least a basic understanding of how this thing works, right? And there are really just three financial models. There is the state-led structure, Hamas, Hezbollah. There is the network-based structure, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others. And then there is your individual perpetrators and cells. Because the financial needs are different, the asset generation is different, the complexity of the asset generation is different, and therefore your detection mechanisms need to be different. But also the good news is it allows you to exclude a lot of things that just don't make sense to waste resources on. So, for example, if you do not have a lot of business in Senegal or West Africa, if you're not in the used car sales business towards Africa as a German institution, your risk of inadvertently financing jinn in the Al-Qaeda coalition in West Africa or the Islamic State Sahel province is very low. If you are, it's very high. Right? If you do not have a financial exposure towards Lebanon, unless you're in the drug business, your Hezbollah exposure may be slightly high. So the big networks, Hamas and Hezbollah, are the hardest nut to crack because their asset generation finances not only the perpetration of violence, as we at the moment see, but also a whole bunch of other roads. Hezbollah runs an entire alternative school system in Lebanon. They need to pay their workers. They need to pay other people. They need to maintain infrastructure. So they have an enormous, usually several hundred million euro income necessarily every year, and an expenditure of pretty much the same size, which means they have to have multiple income streams. They're overlapping and easy to compensate. Neither Hamas nor Hezbollah, who are weaker militarily than they are right now, is at this current point at any danger to end as an ongoing terrorism concern or terrorism organization, because a large part of their budget, which is neither in Lebanon nor in Gaza, is untouched, and the income sources were constructed in a way that, yes, of course, any assets that Hamas was generating in Gaza is now greatly reduced, but you still have Hamas companies, you still have Hamas donations, including via cryptocurrency and social media, you still have state support from Iran. So these income streams still function, fully function, and therefore the organization as a terrorist concern will survive. So that's the state-like structure. The network structure needs to generate, so if you're in West Africa and you're in West Africa, you gotta have to generate your own income sources. So you're talking now about illegal logging, gold smuggling, but also drug smuggling, right? So you need to understand what's the local risk for terrorism financing in West Africa or in Somalia or in Yemen, where those network-based affiliates are actually operating, because the money is generated and expended there, and there's very little international or transnational transfers that actually happen, especially from the center of the organization to the affiliates. And then finally, the perpetrators and single cell attacks, I always say, save the data. It will be important for the investigation. Unless you're exceptionally lucky, you will not have a financial indication that an attack is coming if it's involving one single act of violence, using tools like a car or a knife that are indistinguishable from normal behavior. The guy in Solingen who killed 3 people and injured a whole lot of others bought a knife in a discount supermarket in Germany. I bet you on that day, in that hour, thousands of those knives were bought. There's no way that you're going to pick that up from the financial perspective.
It's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of speaking with Martin Nord. I don't know if you're familiar with Martin. He's CEO of Oonagh, ex-Swedish police force, advisor to FATF, and also believe involved with Interpol. And we were focusing on threat assessments and the 7 pillars of inherent risk. And, you know, when you ask somebody, like, how have you undertaken your risk assessment and your inherent risks, people will jump to geographic and, you mentioned, right, geographic, clients, industry exposure. But the most underserved areas are distribution channels, service channel risk, and third-party risk, because they're actually not inherently understood. And why not? Because of the other channel, products and services. So many people working in risk mitigation don't understand the products and services of the actual institution they're working for. And going back to your point, exactly to FATF's point, FATF said, we don't want you to focus on more risk, we want you to focus where the real risk is. In order to understand that, you need to understand the inherent risk in your business. But we actually, to an extent, have got the wrong people in the room doing the risk assessment. And many times we bring in third parties to do a risk assessment on our business, and they regurgitate just a standardized risk assessment template. So that's my biggest concern in the industry. And the conversation with Martin, actually, we turned it into an article recently to release it called The 7 Pillars of Inherent Risk. And this is where these real threats sit in distribution channels, in vendor exposure, and in third-party exposure as well. But if you don't understand your products and services, you're dead in the water to start with. So what do you think as an industry we can do better to support, you know, governmental efforts such as counter-terrorism, so we can help provide you with better informed data and information?
Look, I mean, it's very clear that there is really not, as far as counterterrorism financing is concerned, there is not a whole lot of expertise within the industry. Yep. There is no dedicated, you have AML trainings coming out of your ears, you have certification channels. ACAM has like a 3.5-hour course, I think, for counterterrorism financing. That somehow makes you into the counterterrorism financing risk. The other side has been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
Just to illustrate this point, when the Taliban first time lost Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, when they withdrew north to south, they essentially relieved all the money exchanges of the hard currency reserves. All the dollars, all the pounds, all the euros were gone. Yeah. A couple of years later, my colleagues, when I was still at the Security Council, found 100...
And we're talking about currency exchanges, we're talking about the Hawala network?
Yes, yes. But they were interested in actually the physical cash. Okay. They just took it out of Afghanistan. A couple of years later, 120 million of that cash was found in a Swiss numbered bank account. Right. So the dudes in Afghanistan who live according to the rules of the 9th century somehow managed to open a numbered Swiss bank account in the Swiss financial industry. So do not underestimate how professional counterterrorism finances are. We were following the career of one key financer of ISIS. He used to be the financial manager of one of the terrorist camps in Afghanistan under Osama bin Laden. Then made a little detour into North Africa, managing the finances of an undergroup of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, then went to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then ended up as one of the key financial managers of the Islamic State during the Caliphate. So this man had seen all the countermeasures, all the detection measures. He made every single mistake that you could make in his career, right? So these are experienced individuals with global connections. The Taliban were able to park several million Australian dollars in Australia by simply buying up houses through refugees. That was simply a way for them to park a lot of their drug proceeds. So this is a global problem. You have to assume that for the big organizations, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Hamas, Hezbollah, you have the same level of sophistication and transnational connections that you have for your largest cartel drug money laundering operations. Yeah. And in some cases, when you talk about the Hezbollah, they're actually doing this as a service for the cartels. They are one of the main cocaine distributors in Europe at the moment, right?
And that was actually something I heard quite recently, was that there are certain expertise within these groups that the other doesn't have. So they're actually beginning to leverage off one another's expertise areas and basically work alongside each other for laundering purposes. And I was just like, I'd never even considered that as an option.
And when it comes to money, there is also no ideological differences. So if you and the listeners remember, when you smoked a cigarette under the Caliphate in Syria, you got executed for drug use by the Islamic State. At the moment, because Hezbollah ramped up the cocaine transports to Europe because they had to compensate for the money they couldn't get out of the Lebanese economy because they are in a war with Israel at the moment, these drugs flow through areas controlled not only by Al-Qaeda, but also by the Islamic State. Yeah. There has been in the last 2 years 0 reports that any of those cocaine transports, which are owned by Hezbollah, had been stopped by either ISIL or Al-Qaeda. So there is no Shia-Sunni divide, there is no we don't like drugs policy of the same organization who executes people for smoking cigarettes, because there's just a lot of money involved. So once it comes to the financing, there is no divide that cannot be bridged if the price is right for both sides.
Fair.
Maybe we can move on to technologies now as well. So just talking about new technologies and the impact and indeed how perhaps they're being misused as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, you said the risk of cryptocurrencies is going down because the terrorists understand that we can detect them better. I'm always surprised, especially when it comes to online technologies, that the industry is so desperate to make everyone believe that their technology is not misused because it has this or that aspect. Look, for the longest time, social media was telling us connecting the world is the way forward. 9 out of the 9 terrorism cases had a strong social media component here in Germany. So obviously, this doesn't say anything about the technology. That doesn't make cryptocurrencies good or cryptocurrencies bad. My example that I always use is one of the greatest inventions of humanity ever is the wheel. One of the first things they did was put it on both sides of a chariot and waged war with it. That doesn't make the wheel good or bad. It just makes it a wheel, right? So, as Bill Maher, my favorite American comic, always says, humans are simply not good people. You give them a technology, they're going to do a lot of good with it and a lot of bad. Same thing is true for cryptocurrencies. Yes, terrorists have been moving away from bitcoins because bitcoins are so yesterday. Yes, they are very transparent, and that is a problem. Your extortionists are still using bitcoins for one simple reason: bitcoins is very easy to use. Terrorist groups are now going towards Monero, Zcash, privacy coins. Number one. Number two, of course there is a lot of and a increasing misuse of cryptocurrencies, not only because the technology involves, but the technology involves in a manner that makes it much harder for anyone to actually say how much is generated for terrorism purposes or for money laundering or for proliferation financing or sanctions evasion, because once you're stepping outside our regulatory framework, the game is over, right? So as the adoption rate of non-custodial wallets that you download as shareware from the internet, as it grows, as the adoption rate for the blackboards as compared to a non-custodial exchanges, as far in comparing to actual commercial exchanges are concerned, right? These create black holes in your transaction chain that you cannot fill because there's no one to ask. And I would posit that neither terrorists nor criminals are very eager to self-identify if you ask the question. So,
if I may say to that point, and that's one reason why I just continually laugh when we talk about client risk assessments. If I'm looking to move illicit funds or funds for illicit purposes, I would have to be an idiot to open a high-risk account, an absolute idiot. And I know all the parameters that will trigger that to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to make sure that I fall within the medium, well, better still, the low-risk bucket. And I will go undetected. And I know how I'm going to use the account, when I'm going to use it, and I know what the monitoring is going to be.
For sure, but I mean, don't. Yes, the FATF says non-custodial wallets and exchanges are high risk. Talk to exchanges. There's hardly any transaction that doesn't include that element right now because it's so widely adopted. So what used to be a clear red flag, stay away, right, is now, if you stay away from the business, like the entire business.
And there's risk in all of the business that we do. It's built on risk. We can't remove risk.
Yes.
And we can't mitigate it within an inch of our lives. Otherwise, and sorry for the expression, but we create a noose for our own necks in terms of operational effectiveness.
But there's also good news as far as terrorism is concerned. Your drug money laundering operation lives on the fact that this is supposed to be very quiet, right? You don't want to talk about this. Terrorists need to talk about this. Need to talk about this not only to create donations, but also to feed the beast of their supporters. Terrorism doesn't work without publicity, right? And that's why the other challenge I wanted to point out is that we actually have, as I said in the panel just now, in this kind of informational environment with social media and AI-powered search tools, it's really hard to hide something. Plus, terrorists need to show that they are relevant because without publicity, terrorism doesn't work.
Yeah.
The problem we have, however, is that you have the perfect pass-the-buck system, right? The platforms say, I'm just providing a platform. What do you mean by terrorism financing? I don't even move the money, right? What do I have to do with that? The exchanges say, well, I see a blockchain transaction. What do I know? The user is a number to me, right? The banks say, I get a bulk transaction from a crowdfunding. How am I supposed to be knowing that there is terrorism finance? Put the three things together. You got the user identified, you got the blockchain identified, and you got the financial transaction at the tail end of it identified. So you got everything you need to identify as a counterterrorism financing thing. However, you have not only regulatory silos, you have legal firewalls. So the platforms neither have an obligation, nor would they actually be legally allowed to give the financial institutions the KYC information.
But it's also as well, in some instances, the third-party payment service providers, and we say well, PSPs are, not all of them are regulated because they're just providing money transfer services for an entity.
Yeah.
So we see
And then
that
you
a
have
lot.
nested services and contracts that say, I do my KYC, and you have no possibility to actually know what the quality of the data is.
And the KYC actually may have been done at the inception. A really good example here.
So we think.
So, well, I have to say, a really good example is like OnlyFans.
Yes.
And let's put away the content and discussion around content, but they
But for
actually,
payment service provider, the business, everyone wants to have that business.
they do an incredible, what is it, something like 17 billion in
Yes.
since 2015.
And growing.
An incredible business. So I was actually curious about their onboarding, because a lot of people were having payments. They weren't able to withdraw monies from their bank accounts because the bank was saying, we don't know where this monies have come
Yeah.
from. So I spoke to the CEO of OnlyFans, Keely Blair, and I said to her, how does it work? She goes, try it for yourself. So I did. I tried to create a user account, and then I tried to create a creator account. It was more challenging to open an account with OnlyFans than to open a fintech account. And I'll be honest with you, facial recognition, verification, all of these steps. I finally did. It took probably the best part of 2.5, 3 days to go through the whole process back, forth. And then I said to him, but wait a second, you have all of the data on the user who's paying money, and it had to be a name matching as well,
Yeah.
and on the creators. So why is the bank refusing the payout? Because there was no blockchain capabilities. So when the payments transfer through the third-party provider, it disappears.
Yeah.
And it's like the simple solution here is blockchain. And then that means that we need the banks to adapt and to introduce better technology capabilities to absorb this.
Yeah, but also, this is Germany,
Yeah.
right? We are governed by what I call the data protection Taliban.
Yeah.
There is no legal framework that OnlyFans would be able to provide that data legally
Yeah.
to a bank, or the other way around, right? So because the OnlyFans is not the bank, right? So there needs to be some legal changes, right? Where we not only try to get over these regulatory silos,
Yeah.
right? So it's really nice, the new cryptocurrency regulation of the European Union. There's an update now with AMLD6, and finally we get crypto transactions actually being regulated. However, what does $1,000 mean in the cryptocurrency environment? It means nothing, right? But it's in there.
What Marcus Clare has been saying, I don't want to take words out of his mouth, but I'm also of the belief we've over-complexualized with rules a lot of the regulation, and we've lost this. You can't see the trees for the wood, so to speak. If you look at onboarding for a bank account, KYC without digital identity, I sound like a broken record saying this because I say it all the time. I will tell you whoever I want you to think I am to open that account. You will only know who I am when I begin to start operating my account. But our transaction monitoring systems, which are static rules and scenarios, are as useless as we call it a chocolate teapot. You put hot water in it, there goes the teapot.
And that's also in the best possible documentary environment, right? So, if you're talking about when I was still working for the Security Council, the problem at a certain point was no longer majority passport forgeries. There was identity forgeries because of breeder documents, right? So your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, your death certificate. Now this here in Germany and in Europe is the best environment possible. You don't even have an identity card in the UK, right? I'm not even want to talk about how that looks.
I do have an Irish one.
All right, okay. I don't want to talk about the United States, but you go to Africa, how would anyone know what a birth certificate looks like? Or a marriage certificate? There is no central registry. So, here, right, you actually can demand, government verified documents. They are controlled in space. They're getting better and better and more secure. However, cryptocurrencies, mobile banking, the real business is actually in Africa, in Asia, where you have none of this, right? So, yes, here it's true, right? It's really hard to cheat on your KYC. There, it's hard not to cheat.
I actually, just a funny little anecdote. I was in the Algarve with my family last week, and we went to check into the hotel, and I had my Irish digital, card with me, which says at the top passport. So my husband hands over his passport and the two children's passports and hands over my card. And the gentleman behind the desk says, no, we need more than a driver's license. And I'm in my wallet, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've lost my ID card, realizing my husband had given him. And I said, no, but this is my passport. He said, I've never seen it before, so I can't use it for your check-in. I was like, I'm just trying to check into a hotel. I was like, this is more stringent than we going to the bank. Yeah. But yeah, it's also a lot of understanding of, as you rightly said, understanding what the document means. You know, is it a legal document? How should it look like? What is the format? What is the legal entity that should be distributing it or issuing it? And that's, again, a challenge working in banks as well. You're expected to know so much across so many multiple jurisdictions, and there is a lot of fragmentation within the regulation as well, which makes global standards incredibly challenging to apply them across the entity.
No, for sure.
Okie dokie.
That's very good. Yeah, really, it's certainly we can. I think we could carry on that conversation. Can't we? Should we move? We were going to talk about transferring funds, I think, weren't we, as well, touching on the question we have is, does this mean that the classic techniques to transfer funds, such as Hawala, are no longer used? And what are the main challenges, I guess, to combating such misuse?
So number one, it's never just one technology anymore, right? So we have to disavow ourselves from the belief that A, donations are the main income source for the big terrorist organization. Yes, they are an A income source, but they're not the only income source, not by a long shot. Number one, yes, Hawala still plays a role, but this is usually part of a transaction chain, right? And it starts potentially with a bank transaction or a cryptocurrency transaction, and then at the very last step when it goes into the conflict zones, maybe Hawala regularly plays a role. So it's part of the chain, but the time where you walk in with 100 euros here near the main train station in Germany and you Hawala it to your terror camp in Afghanistan, these are over. People are more sophisticated than that. However, and this is my peeve subject in particular, the way that the regulations are set up here in Germany and in many other European countries is we cannot decide what we want. So the legal situation here is, it is not illegal to use Hawala, yet it's illegal to be an Hawala-dar, right? So that means the user has absolutely no sense that he or she is doing anything wrong, and we're disincentivizing the Hawala-dar from actually maintaining any data that would be necessary, useful to actually figure out that terrorism financing has been going on, or money laundering, or any other financial crime activity, because he's doing something illegal. So he gets punished, and therefore regularly Hawala-dars are discovered as being Hawala-dars, and that's it. So he gets punished, but has he laundered any money? Has he, facilitated some terrorism financing transaction? We just don't know, because he has no incentive to keep any data beyond the immediate need of making sure that this transaction is then settled eventually. And then afterwards, he immediately, of course, destroys all the evidence, because it's evidence of a crime. So my argument is, we're going to have to make a decision here. Either we say it's just simply legal, and then we're going to have other payment service providers saying, how can you do this? We are so much regulated, and you're getting us out of business. Where my counter argument is, I see payment service providers in Australia, and Australia has legalized Hawala many, many years ago. The other argument is, if you do that, the Hawala, the transactions costs are going to go so up, because of course you're going to have some regulation on KYC and due diligence. Again, counter argument, Australia did it, Indonesia done it, Malaysia did it, Burkina Faso did it, Djibouti did it, even Afghanistan and the Republic legalized Hawala and put regulations on them. In none of these cases did the transaction costs in any way, shape or form increase beyond the capacity of the market. So there is really no statistical evidence that says if we legalize it, then it would make things worse. Or we say, sorry, we do have a lot of payment service providers. Why do we need Hawala? So criminalize being Hawala and criminalize using Hawala. But this, we want it, but we don't want it because we are afraid that migrant workers can't transfer money home. That's just the worst of both worlds.
But that was actually what I was going to say there about the societal impact of banning it for the foreign workers. And I know I lived in Singapore and in Hong Kong for 12 years.
Yeah.
And majority of the foreign workers, that's how they're sending their money back home. And the fees they get charged at Western Union, I apologize for naming any names, but your high street money transfers are extortionate. And
because they are in monopoly. Exactly. So if you would...
So they need these networks to get
legalize it. As I said, Australia, you can actually, on Austrac, the FIU Australia's website, you can Google your neighborhood Hawala. It's actually an advertisement for the Hawala, right? The only difference between a Hawala and a payment service provider is Hawala get audited every single year, right? So it is possible to legalize it. But as I said, if you don't feel comfortable with legalizing a financial system that is outside the normal rules, then okay, this situation where you criminalize the one doing it and you're not criminalizing the one using it, that's just disincentivizing, and this really is not going to be helpful for the investigation or for having any kind of understanding of how much is actually used for nefarious purposes.
Australia continues to surprise me about where it is a leader in the market in terms of, we see recent scam typologies, and they are the market leader, in my opinion, of basically detection and prevention and protecting the public. Under Paul Jeftovich at Austrac, did incredible work. I highly respect the man. Also had the luxury of working with him at HSBC. Australia continues to do phenomenal work and really has a deterrent. Even the other day, they basically, it was a fine against, I'm going to say Binance, if I'm not correct, or Revolut. And it was a small fine, but it wasn't the cost of the fine. It was the fact of why the fine happened. It was to remind people that regulations are in place for a reason, and failure to report is actually causing a subsequent consequence to their ability to detect illicit activity. I've been so impressed with Australia over the past few years, starting with the whole kind of CSAM enforcement actions, which Mr. Jeftovich led, and then continuing after him through what we're seeing now with modern day scams. We need to look to Australia actually now.
Yeah, I mean the Australian approach always has been a very cooperative approach with the private industry, and the government only is going to do stuff that the private industry, after trying verifiably, says we can't do that, right? So the other really innovative thing is ammonium nitrate, which is the precursor of pretty much the majority of IEDs around the world for terrorist organization and secessionists and civil wars. If you have an IED, you either have potassium or you have ammonium nitrate, which is also, of course, a miracle chemical for the agricultural industry.
Like you say, we call it fertilizer.
Exactly, right? So Australia is the only country that can tell you to the hour where every single kilogram of ammonium nitrate is in the country, right? Kilometer by kilometer, they know exactly where it is. And that is a private public sector partnership where the industry saw the need, the government explained why. They were in Afghanistan, they were in Iraq, so they understood what ammonium nitrate can do. And so, this partially government regulated but private sector driven thing is the best control of ammonium nitrate on the globe. So involving the private sector, right, having involved the private sector, the potentially involving of the private sector may have led to a better, more effective cryptocurrency regulation in the European Union. As I said, what does $1,000 mean, right? So what happened within the European Union is, number one, for whatever odd reason, we started just regulating fiat crypto fiat transactions, as if, crypto is some kind of geeky subject that doesn't actually transfer any value, right? Because it had to be some connection to the fiat, and crypto is only coming now. Secondly, now that it's coming, we're putting the same idea of, this is the amount and there's a threshold. After this, you have to do things, not understanding the volatility of crypto, right? Plus, not also understanding how much more you can demand of exchanges, because they not only see the immediate transaction, they can see the blockchain if they like to, right? And so you can actually risk doing less here on thresholds, but do more on requirements, because the information is instantaneous. It's far deeper than a bank who has to, get your card, right? This is not a question where they need to get the card. They can see this transaction, the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the entire history of that wallet if they choose to do so. So we can do much more demands here and need to do much less nonsense here.
But it comes back to the point, earlier you said, how did we come up with this figure? It's about having the right skill sets and mindsets around the table when we're drafting the legislation. And when we spoke about this earlier today as well. And there seems to be a belief, well, if we have a consultation round, we're all going to be good. And it's like, well, if you have the wrong people drafting, how are they going to interpret the feedback on the consultation paper? So it's a cart before the horse situation. Yeah. And that was one of the beautiful things that I found working in a crypto firm, was working with the engineers and understanding the mindset of the engineers and how innovation really can drive good solutions.
Yes, of course.
As long as we work with the right people and we speak the same language. So,
brilliant. Yeah, perfect. Maybe a very last question. I think we did cover off, we were talking about the reforms of regulatory and legal. I think we've talked about that. But just with the Counter Extremism Project organisation, where do you see the main, I guess not focus, but challenges for yourself in the next 12, 18 months, let's say?
Look, I mean, clearly there is a black hole called social media and crowdfunding platforms, right, which are increasingly becoming important aspects of the terrorism financing environment. But we do have initial regulation, the Digital Services Act in the European Union. The US government is not particularly keen on this subject. There is a letter now from the Trade Commission to the platform saying ignore it, right, including in Europe, which I think is an interesting understanding of how law works from the US side. But this Digital Services Act has not been understood in its usefulness for counterterrorism financing. It speaks of illegal content. That's the basic idea. Yep. We want to regulate illegal content. Now, in every single country in the European Union, as far as I know, terrorism financing is illegal. Hence, content that relates to terrorism financing is illegal. But the way this has now been implemented is as if the social media environment had nothing to do with counterterrorism financing. That there would be no donation drives, there would be no transfer of information on how to transact, no account numbers, no wallet addresses, no fundraising via these platforms. So one of the reforms really is to look at that regulatory environment which we now have and simply be more creative on how we use it. Because if this remains a separate issue, the bank, the payment service providers, the exchanges, lacking the information that is there, because at one point or the other, if you have a donation drive, you're going to have to tell your people what it's for, right? And you're going to have to post what you're going to do with that money. The information is there that clearly points towards terrorism financing. If we can get that Digital Services Act either slightly reformed or in the interpretation of the governments more innovatively used, then we have a big step forward in countering the financing of terrorism in Europe, which does have a significant part where donations are raised, and if they're raised in Europe by now, it's usually raised via social media and crowdfunding platforms.
I thought you were going to say, in response to what's your biggest challenge in the next 12 to 18 months, would be trying to get into New York to get into your office.
So far, knock on wood, all good, all good. I have a green card and I've not been not having any problems, but you never know. This is a lottery game every time.
Right, I think that's a wrap now, isn't it? But, but thank you so much today for your contribution at the event, and obviously with us both now as well. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Honour.
Honour.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.